Hi, we are now ready for the first panel discussion of the day, funding sustainability. And with me I've got Thina Saltvedt, Chief Analyst for Sustainable Finance at NORDEA, Heidi Nakken, State Secretary in the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization in Norway, and Elisabeth Holvik, Chief Economist at SpareBank 1. Welcome here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Thina, what does this mean for your organization, for NORDEA? How are you approaching this kind of thinking?
I mean, for NORDEA, sustainability is one of the pillars in how we work. So we have incorporated sustainability in all the products, in all the services, and basically how our framework and our strategy is based. So I think this is, changing the way we're thinking, the way we are approaching different questions, and not at least how we hopefully cooperate with a society. And I think in this setting, I think also that the COVID-19 has opened many eyes to see the relation between our consumption, the way we live, and how we actually are influencing the environment and the social society around us. And I think in that kind of sense that is healthy, because we need to see and we need to put a price on actually how our consumption, how we live, are actually influencing the world around us. And I hope that this could improve in the future with the experiences we have from the COVID-19 situation.
Absolutely, and very interesting. I'll come back to that later. And Heidi, you come from quite a different approach to this, as working for the government. How are you?
Yes.
And what's your thoughts on the subject?
In our sector of the government, we have a broad spectrum of different subjects, and we have like planning. In planning, you have to think about sustainability all the way, because that's the most powerful tool of making society go further. Also, we have like the maps of Norway, which can sound quite old-fashioned, but now when they all get digital and 3D over the whole of Norway, that would change some business models. So we have to all the way think about this and enabling. I think the key word is enabling business and societies to be more sustainable. That's our part of it.
Of course, because it's all hanging on together, right? So, and Elisabeth, what's your thoughts as a SpareBank, a savings bank?
SpareBank 1 is the largest alliance of local and regional saving banks in Norway, and we have in fact a 200 years tradition of helping local community develop sustainably. And we're also a provider of fund management and pension. And our fund management has a proven track record of being an active, truly active investor in sustainable companies. So we believe that you have to be active as an owner to shape the future. In the business of management these days, there's a very strong trend towards passive investment, in which we don't believe in. We believe that you should be active, you should be responsible, and you should help change from within the companies.
Okay, but doesn't that contribute to more risk-taking in the investment?
In fact, not, because we identified this trend in ESG 10, 15 years ago, and we were very early in investing in companies that has now been very attractive. So by identifying and believing in the strategy, we have in fact one of the industry's best track record in asset management.
Okay, Thina.
I think it's also important to remember the role of the capital market, because that's probably why we're here. And it's important that actually we start to include the risk of not doing the right things. Because I think now we're feeling the externalities with the investments, the lendings we have done for very many years. without calculating the climate risk, the social impact we actually do. And I think that is the change we are going through now, that this is included in all the investment decisions, in all the lending decisions we're doing. Because a challenge is that if we don't include that, of course, we're seeing the negative effects, externalities, the cost the climate change are putting on the society. And I think the capital market has a very big role in the shift, because we need to put some money where actually the good solutions are for the future, the long-term future. Because the capital market is usually quite short-sighted. It needs to be a bit more long-sighted so it can actually include the effects of what we're doing. So that is the change, and it's very important that we support that work's going on. If it's smart cities or if it's green solutions for the oceans, for example, the money needs to support these.
Yeah.
And
Elisabeth.
Yeah, of course. If a bank has to choose which companies to lend to, and if a company does not take into account this environment and so forth, it's a huge risk that suddenly the customers will abandon those companies, and that will lead to a loss for the banks. So I think it's part of the new way of assessing risk and return. And the capital market now, we are very front runner in this change. So I think we have to release the entrepreneurship and the creativity and the private sector, and the banks can facilitate that and force that force.
Because this is a new way of thinking, because traditionally those consequences of and the cost of the environmental footprint will often land on the public bodies, maybe.
I think if you...
What's your thought on that, Heidi?
Well, not anymore all the time, I think. Well, we see now that the climate change also changed the way of planning, and also bringing costs on things that have not been well enough thought through, like 40 years ago. You can take it down to the details. You can take it down to massive rainwater. When you have big areas that can't take all this rainwater, the owner of the buildings will have to do something about that, and that costs money. And you can put that example into many other things, that if you don't do it smart now, it's going to be big money in 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 30 years, you don't know. And that's also a part of the risk picture I think the banks have to think about. When we make the rules for how to make new buildings, as we do in our department, you have to think about the cost of building it. Yes, it's very important to keep the cost down on building because we need more building. But at the same time, we need to think about the cost of living in these buildings, and for the long term, for electricity or for other costs by living. So it's a different balance now than it used to be.
Yes, because now we're talking more systems than solutions, like Nadine was talking about in her keynote. But it's a major thing to do, to think systems over solution. How are we going to approach that, Thina?
I think we actually have done something you are indicating here, that going through the housing portfolio in Norway, and looked at how could the different climate risks actually influence the different housings or the different buildings and areas around Norway. So I looked at, for example, landslides, clay slide, sea level rise, and there will be different type of climate risks that could actually have an influence on the portfolio. And it's important because that's important for us as everyday people, because where do we put the money in Norway? We put it in our houses. So what will happen with the value of our houses could have a big impact also on the financial system. So it's important, not necessarily today, but what will happen in the bit longer term. What happens when the sea level is rising? How could that influence the value of your house and your possibility to lend more money to have your consumption going forward. So these kind of risks, and I think today it's more like a nudge, you know, to the municipalities, that they start to strengthen the different areas that might be in a high risk class. So in this way we could work together, because when we're doing this analysis, we go to the municipalities and said, okay, you know, we should do something together here. Same with the insurance companies as well. They are in the front line in the financial sector, and they have already started to notice the increase in payouts caused by the climate changes. So these kind of systematic going through how climate changes, how social changes can have an impact on cities in the way we live today is very important.
Yeah, indeed. But how am I, as a consumer maybe, or a house buyer, going to think about this? How can I understand what's the best for me to invest in?
We have already started, and that is only from a starting point, but we have started to make an analysis, a risk analysis based on climate and on social aspects. It's called ESG analysis. And remember these three capitals, because E is for environmental, S for social, and G for governance. And all the investment decisions we make, all the lending decisions we make, or companies or private people who will have access to capital in the future, will have this kind of analysis. So traditional, when we look at risk, we look at credit risk, we look at market risk, but now we include this ESG risk, and that is to take into consideration the changes in climate and in the environment, and also the social dimensions. Hopefully, this will give us a more holistic view of the total risk a private person or a company is facing, and hopefully that will also guide a capital to a more sustainable direction.
Okay, thank you. Elisabeth, Sparebank 1, what's your strategy towards it? You mentioned earlier to have active investments. What's that? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, if you look at the pension funds, it's been a huge trend that you can just be a passive investor. You replicate the market, but then you're kind of a free rider on active managers. And to be more sustainable, they have kind of excluded coal, you exclude bombs, and you exclude something that's truly bad. But you're not really changing the companies from within. So we, as a strategy, have said we are investing in companies, and we try to change companies from within. So if you look at, for instance, in Denmark, you had a huge coal and oil producer that today would be excluded from, green investment funds. But if you invested it early, today they are the largest wind producer in Norway, and it's truly a green company. So the ownership part of, you have to be an active investor. I think that's a fundamental for managing to get this change done quickly enough. If we rely on the government and the state to do it, we have some horrible experience from history that this central planning idea, it turns out badly. You need the market force. Market is fantastic to do the job, as long as you price correctly, as you said, the externalities, the pollution correctly. Then you can utilize the market force to do it.
Heidi, as working in the central planning, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I will not argue with her on that one, because I think we quite agree, coming from where I'm coming from politically. But the central planning is not to invade in the business or in the way to do things. We will leave to the market. It is about enabling. And you were touching in on this analysis. Analysis needs data. The government has enormous amounts of data in different forms. And business models will come and go when it comes to how to share data, who owns the data, and this will be a topic for a long time to come now. Who owns it? Is it open? Is there any, she said, Dr. Barbara earlier today, it's very if the government go in and fund specifics, it can very fast go wrong, because it's you will make gatekeeper of the business models. They say this is my idea, so as long as I can keep the data away from the rest, I can have my own business model on top of this. So it is about open sources, open data, sharing data from the government side, because that is public knowledge. We have in Norway enormous amounts when it comes to statistics, when it comes to other things, and now also with the strategy of digitization of the public sector, there will be a lot of data everywhere. And as I mentioned, these maps, when you have digital 3D maps of whole of Norway and the coastline, that is enormous amounts of data. So it's about opening and using open sources and enabling.
Thina, I saw you were eager to speak here.
Yeah, because I like to comment on that as well. The access to data is so important because, as I said, we're making, or many are now starting to make this analysis, this rating of companies according to these sustainability environmental issues, the E, S, and the G. One challenge is that there are difficult to get data. So it's so important that we have good data. It's also difficult to, or there are different rating companies, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, at least large ones, who can give you a good rating, and the next one can give you a bad rating. So which one should I listen to? So we need a more comparable system. We need a more transparent system, so we are sure that when we actually make a decision or an investment, or we make a lending offer, it needs to be transparent what we're doing, because you need to know what I'm doing. And we need to have the same kind of reference as well. If you talk about green, or if you talk about green, it needs to be the same as when I do that. So we talk about the same thing, otherwise we could end up in greenwashing, social washing. So it's so important that we get more transparency about methodology and data we're using. And I just wanted to comment on how fast this development is going, because the last, from 2012 into 2018, we saw quite a big increase in green bonds, for example. But only the last 2 years, the green bonds are continuing to rise sharply. But we also see that the focus is not only any longer on environmental and climate issues, but now the social bond market is also exploding. And that is, we are getting used to this way of thinking, and now including the social aspects. And I think the COVID-19 has helped out there as well, because one thing we have seen exploding is in this year, since the COVID-19, is something called social bond, which is basically governments lending money to social projects.
Yeah. Heidi, what do you think about that, the government's role in social projects regarding the SDGs?
It has to do with the whole sustainable idea. It's so much more than the green, and the social part is also a very important part of it. And like in Norway, we want to live all along the coasts, although we have a mega trend of moving to cities. How do we plan for this? That is social. You have to think broadly in all parts of the planning.
Yeah, because, and I hope, because when we think about how to plan, I think we need to first of all rethink how we measure growth. So the growth model has to be changed and include the aspects of sustainability. But also, and I hope while looking at you, is because we need to think more circular as well. Yes, circular economy aspects need to get into our way of thinking, a way of using resources. And we are lagging behind our neighbors here in Norway. I think that is because our economy has been good. So we haven't felt, this economic stress from the financial crisis, for example. But our neighbors, for example, they had to rethink: how do I use all the products I have? Maybe I can repair it, maybe I can recycle, or maybe I can use less. And this is not something that we are very good at, how to recycle our garbage. But we have to think about how to design things. how could we actually start from the design moment to see how could we reuse the different components of this product, so we could set it in the second circle and reuse our resources. So I hope that is something the community can grasp and put into their strategy, because that could help in a way the way we're living and the way of build these new cities as well.
Of course, Heidi.
Yes, and that is a bit to the core of where it will come, new business ideas and how the whole society will change over this. But the government's role is not to make these new business models, because that's for the market to do, but we have to be better and faster to make the rules of how to do it, all from how to digitize the building materials, how to use low carbon building materials, all this set of criteria that has to go into a building. And that is where I feel the businesses is quite offensive, and or quite on top of things and want to do more of it. But from the government side, it's a slow process to change all these small, tiny laws that comes together in this. That's where we have to get better. We have to get a lot better.
Okay, Thina.
Yeah, because I totally agree. If we're going to make this happen, we need some changes in the laws. We know that some laws today will not allow us to reuse materials, for example, and that is in the construction sector. Yep. Also, we could have more public demand. So when you're asking for projects, for example, you could require that 40%, for example, of this new public building needs to, the building materials need to come from reused materials. And in this way, you could push the market to develop further or faster. And in this way, we could cooperate as well. The industry and, of course, the financial industry need to support these kind of strategies. Also, the way we split the risk, because in all these kind of new ways of or new technologies, new strategies, often the financial market is a bit worried about the risks. So if you have models who could get us kick-started with risk-sharing models between the government and more private money, we could have this development going faster, I think.
But if you have risk-sharing between the government and private market, what does that do with the market and with the free market that we were talking about earlier?
One of the problems now with the corona crisis is that the private sector was hit really bad. And the public sector with 0 interest rate level, it's a huge incentive to just borrow a lot and do a lot of good things. But by taking on debt, it's an implied increase in tax level going forward. And I think we should contemplate a bit about the productivity growth in the economy and the growth potential, because after all, that's the only way to get things changing and to increase the living standard of a country. It's through productivity growth. And by having too much regulation, too much good intention, we have to plan, and its cost, and it adds on. And it's not releasing the creativity that we need. So I'm worried that this is a kind of a trap. And if you look back to the late 60s when you had the revolution, and it's the same mentality that we have to include more people, we have to do more good, and it's only added cost to the economy, and suddenly you had a sharp decline in productivity growth. So although I support all good things, we have to be cautious not to just increase the cost and make it more difficult to really do the disruption of old ways of doing things. With 0 interest rate level, a lot of companies can survive,
Yeah, because to me it sounds like there are two kind of opposites here. On one hand, we want the government and the state to be an active part, to take risk and to help us get the solutions we need. On the other hand, we want less regulations and more openness towards new business models and solutions. So how are we going to solve this? Heidi?
We do not need more regulation. We need a bit different regulation and less of it. It must be easier to do the smart thing. That is the whole point. We should not make new things on top of the other things. We have to take away the things that doesn't work, because there are obstacles in the regulations now to do good in this sector. We have to take away the obstacles and then make better regulations to open for creative business to thrive, and that's a important part of it. And we also, I'll stop there because I know it's going to come more.
Elisabeth, you want to follow?
I basically think we need to have more faith in also owner and entrepreneurs and capitalists. We saw in Corona that actually a lot of companies gave back support from money from the government, even though it was free money, because they said, well, we didn't need them, so we give them back so they can be better used. So I think we need to appreciate, the creativity that also owners and entrepreneurs can contribute. Look at Elon Musk. He's an inspiration for all kids nowadays, and what one man can do to change the world. So I think we need to have a little bit more faith also from the political side to it's people, it's us that has to do the change, and we have to be allowed to do it, to try, to fail, to do the risk that's needed to change the world, so to speak.
I'll vote for her.
Thina,
I don't think we need to go to Elon Musk to see that. We could just go around this coastal areas, because you can see already from 2014 when the oil prices crashed, you could see that when you're forced to think differently, you're seeing that the development is coming. The same we're doing now as well. You see that the companies are changing. They are changing the focus, but the cooperation between the government and the private capital could make this go even faster if we work together, because you can't have one of them doing all the work on its own. And I think that is what we're lacking since 2015. The politicians were very eager to get or focus on climate change until the Paris Agreement was signed. But after that, actually, the industry and the capital market has been driving this change, in my opinion. So I think it's important that we work together, because we need the politicians there to do the right decisions as well. And in that kind of sense, these kind of corporations, we see that, for example, we have succeeded to helping out small startup, for example, in the cooperation with Innovation Norway, to be able to get more money into this development of new ideas. And it's also important to see what the COVID-19 has done to the market, because the larger companies with a good capital base, they've been more robust to survive this period we are into now. But we've seen that the medium-sized and smaller companies have been the one with the biggest problems, because they don't have the same capital base. So more cooperation between the different larger or smaller companies as well could help.
And of course you need the right incentives set from the government, like you have to price pollution and CO2, for instance, and you have to have better incentives for people to save in startups, to say that you can have a share in the company. So a new way of owning and be partners in the change, I think would be very interesting for trigger this change into the greener environment.
Yeah. Heidi, so you were up with your hand.
Yeah, and it also, the public sector have a very big role in buying things. They buy, they buy and they build a lot. And now when the private sector was hit harder by the COVID, it's very important that the public sector keep building, keep buying. That's very important. But also, when you go out in the market to find what to buy, how to build, all that things, there is already in the regulation an open field to set stronger focus on sustainable materials and other things. When it comes down, it often ends up with just the money, but the public sector must be better on using this big muscle to buy more sustainable, and that way the sustainable companies will have a push.
Indeed. We're closing to the end here, but I want to challenge you all three in one sentence. What is the next step towards a more sustainable way of funding? Yeah?
No doubt what I would like is that we get a requirement that all companies and financial institutions need to deliver their climate footprint and their sustainable footprint. So a transparent way of reporting on sustainability and climate risk, so actually the audience can see what we're doing with the money and how the companies are working with climate and sustainability.
Transparency. Yeah.
Reporting.
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 Yeah. Heidi?
Good KPIs and cooperations and open data source. Then we are in a good way.
Elisabeth?
An active ownership policy, to be truly active, not just passive.
Okay, so we need to be transparent and reporting on good KPIs and have active investors in the market. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me for this panel discussion. I've learned a lot. It was really interesting. Thank you so much. And also thank you to Nadine and Barbara for their fantastic keynotes in the beginning. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you.